In 1955, 340,000 Americans poured steel for a company that built the Empire State Building, armed 2 world wars, and became the first billion-dollar corporation in history. In December 2023, that company was sold to Japan for $14.9 billion, less than Adobe offered for a design app. Someone signed that deal, someone cashed the check. And the trail of boardroom decisions, executive bonuses, and stripped assets leads not to foreign competition, but to 3 men whose names belong on every shuttered mill gate from Youngstown to Gary. Steel dust coated the air above Pittsburgh, Gary, and Youngstown in 1955. 340,000 men and women clocked in under blast furnaces, their shifts measured by the whistle and their futures tied to one company. A black and white photograph from the Pittsburgh mill that year shows a river of workers spilling out at shift change, faces hard, hands burned, uniforms streaked with sweat and metal. U.S. Steel didn't just pay wages. It built city blocks, schools, union halls, and Little League diamonds. Generations marked time by the mill's siren. Fast forward to December 2023. The Reuters headline read that U.S. Steel proposed a $14.9 billion merger with Nippon Steel. Not $40 billion, not even $20. $14.9 billion, barely enough to buy a trending design app. Adobe's failed bid for Figma the year before had come in at $20 billion. In the market's eyes, the company that forged the Empire State Building, supplied steel for 2 world wars, and once employed more Americans than the entire U.S. Army, was worth less than a bundle of code and a marketing plan. No executive stepped in to halt the auction. No senator demanded a fair valuation. The deal went through with the stroke of a pen, the signatures of men who would claim bonuses and stock options while the last generation of steelworkers counted out their pensions. The numbers don't lie. 340,000 jobs, the backbone of the industrial Midwest, exchanged for a figure that wouldn't cover the cost of rebuilding a single blast furnace. The question isn't just how U.S. Steel fell so far. It's who made the call, who got paid, and who was left behind when the final check cleared. On February 26, 1901, a single sheet of legal paper in New York certified the birth of the United States Steel Corporation. J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, and Elbert Gary put their names to a $1 billion charter, an amount so large that the press called it impossible, a sum greater than the U.S. federal budget of that year. That certificate did not just launch a company, it created the world's first billion-dollar corporation, a new kind of power that could move markets, shape cities, and set the terms of American life. The numbers were staggering, even by today's standards. Adjusted for inflation, that $1 billion is worth more than $33 billion now. The initial issued capital, $400 million, dwarfed the assets of any competitor. U.S. Steel did not just dominate, it swallowed 2/3 of the nation's steel production by the 1920s, controlling the raw material that built modern America. In 1915, the company poured 12 million tons of steel. By 1930, that figure hit 20 million. No other firm came close. The ledgers and contracts from those years read like a blueprint for the country itself. U.S. Steel supplied the beams for the Empire State Building, the cables for the Golden Gate Bridge, the hulls and armor for the ships and tanks that crossed the Atlantic in World War II. Federal procurement files from 1941 to 1945 show over 12 million tons of steel routed to the war effort, with U.S. Steel accounting for nearly half of all deliveries. The company's name is stamped on the backbone of the nation, from Manhattan's skyline to San Francisco's bay. At its peak, U.S. Steel's output defined the American century. The 1930s crest, 20 million tons a year, stood as a monument to what was possible when capital, labor, and ambition were forced into alignment. But the same legal charter that gave birth to this industrial giant also set the terms for its unraveling. The stakes were not just money or steel. They were the very shape of the country, and who would control it when the furnaces finally cooled. Monessen, Pennsylvania; Youngstown, Ohio; Gary, Indiana. These are not just names on a map. They are the coordinates of American loss. One by one, the mills that built these towns went cold. In 1979, Monessen's blast furnaces shut down, erasing 2.3 million tons of annual capacity and sending 3,000 workers home. 2 years later, the Youngstown plant followed. 1.8 million tons gone, and another 4,000 families left with nothing but severance and a foreclosure notice. In 1983, Gary's Twin Strip Works, once a symbol of modern steelmaking, closed its gates for good. That was another 1.5 million tons and another 2,500 jobs erased from the payroll. Between 1978 and 1984, U.S. Steel's production capacity dropped from 24 million tons to 17 million. That is a third of the company's muscle, cut out and sold off. The workforce collapsed by more than 150,000. SEC filings from those years read like autopsy reports. The 1980 Form 10-K warned of obsolete equipment, uncompetitive labor contracts, and excess capacity, which necessitated plant closures. The 1984 filing said asset rationalization was required to maintain shareholder value. The boardroom language was clinical, but the reality was anything but. Schools closed. Main streets emptied. The whistle that once signaled the start of a shift became a memory, replaced by the silence of shuttered gates and overgrown parking lots. Executives signed off on every closure, their names stamped on the filings: Roger Blau, David Roderick, and a parade of directors who collected bonuses for every $1 million saved in labor costs. The SEC reports made it sound rational, unlocking hidden shareholder value and aligning cost structure with market demand. But the cost was measured in lives. In Youngstown alone, nearly 50,000 jobs vanished in a span of 18 months. Gary's unemployment rate doubled. Monessen's tax base collapsed. The board called it efficiency. The towns called it betrayal. The logic was always the same: close the mills, blame the market, and file the paperwork. Each shutdown was justified in a footnote. Each community loss explained away as a line item. The company's production, once the pride of the nation, became a ledger entry to be trimmed. The men who made those decisions did not have to drive past the empty houses or explain to their children why the Little League field was overgrown. They had SEC language and stock options. The rest got pink slips and a lesson in what happens when the boardroom weighs human lives against quarterly returns. In 1987, U.S. Steel sold off its coke-making division for $1.1 billion. The deal was signed by executives who argued the company needed liquidity, but the cash never made it to the mills. It went to the balance sheet, to dividends, to executive compensation. 6 years later, in 1993, they spun off the mining arm: iron ore, coal, all the raw muscle that once made U.S. Steel self-sufficient. The buyer was Rio Tinto, a multinational that did not care if Youngstown or Gary survived another winter. By the late 1990s, the company's rail logistics network, once the steel arteries of Pennsylvania, was sold to private equity. Each sale stripped away another layer of resilience, another piece of the company's ability to weather a downturn or invest in the future. Numbers tell the story. In 1990, U.S. Steel's capital expenditures stood at $1.3 billion. By 2005, that figure had withered to $420 million. While ArcelorMittal and Nippon Steel poured billions into new furnaces and electric arc technology, U.S. Steel's board cut spending to the bone. The company's SEC filings are a graveyard of promises, like unlocking hidden value, refocusing on core assets, optimizing shareholder returns. What they never said out loud was that each asset sold, each dollar not reinvested, made the company weaker and the towns around it poorer. No one was forced to make these choices. Board minutes from the era show directors approving every divestiture, every capital expenditures cut, with full knowledge of what was being lost. Bonuses and stock options swelled as the asset base shrank. In the eyes of Wall Street, the company became a shell, a pile of cash and contracts, not a living industrial engine. The groundwork was laid for a foreign takeover, not by foreign competition, but by the men in the boardroom who signed away the future one asset at a time. December 23, 2023. The definitive agreement lands on the Treasury's CFI U.S. docket. Nippon Steel's bid for U.S. Steel, $14.9 billion on paper, but the real price is buried in the fine print. Over the next 7 months, the deal runs a gauntlet of government reviews and political posturing. The Treasury's letter of intent arrives January 15, 2024, opening the first 30-day window for agencies to dig in. The Department of Energy, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State each file their own requests for information, citing national security, supply chain risk, and the fate of critical infrastructure. Twice, the review clock is extended, first to April 30th, then to July 31st. Each extension buys time for Nippon Steel's lobbyists to sweeten the offer, a $4 billion pledge for new investment, modernization, and a promise to keep U.S. headquarters in Pittsburgh. The Department of Commerce verifies the commitment, but the union is not buying it. On February 28th, the United Steelworkers file a formal objection, calling the sale a betrayal and warning that job guarantees and capital pledges mean nothing without real control. Their filing lands in the CFI U.S. record, attached to an economic impact statement that spells out the risk to pensions and bargaining power. In the background, lawyers for both sides hammer out a golden share clause. Filed with the SEC on February 15, 2024, the provision gives the U.S. Treasury a supervoting share, a 10-year veto over any sale, merger, or closure of domestic steel assets. The clause is designed to placate Congress and the White House, but everyone in the room knows it is a workaround, not a shield. The regulatory hurdles that once could have killed the deal are now just levers, negotiated and neutralized. Each signature, each extension, each clause moves the sale closer to closing, while the workers and retirees wait for the fine print to decide their future. Article 9.2 of the Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel merger agreement runs just 4 sentences, but it rewrites the future for 70,000 retirees. The clause is blunt. All obligations, liabilities, and contractual commitments of United States Steel Corporation under any United States registered pension plans shall be transferred, assigned, and assumed by Nippon Steel U.S. Steel Inc., a wholly owned subsidiary of Nippon Steel Corporation, effective as of the closing date. No loopholes, no soft landings. The Japanese parent takes over every pension promise, every retiree's monthly check, every line item on the books. But the fine print cuts both ways. Section 12.1 hands the U.S. Steel Board a veto over any proposal to amend, curtail, or terminate these plans, unless a regulator forces their hand. 10 days to object in writing, or the new owner gets a free pass. The board, stacked with executives who negotiated the deal, now holds the only key to the lock. The same men who signed the sale, who will collect bonuses and exit packages measured in millions, are the last line of defense for benefits earned over a lifetime of dangerous work. The numbers are not abstract. 70,000 names sit on the rolls. Each one is a former millwright, welder, or bookkeeper who gave 30 or 40 years to a company that once built America. Now, their security depends on the decisions of a handful of directors, most of whom never worked a furnace or changed a shift. The pension trust, once the sacred promise of industrial America, is now a bargaining chip, transferred, assigned, and assumed in a single paragraph. The stakes are not just legal, they are personal. The paperwork is signed, but the future of every retiree hangs on whether the board uses its veto for the people who built the company or for the men who sold it. Roger Blau signed his name to a dividend payout in 1962 that sent 68% of U.S. Steel's net earnings straight to shareholders. The board minutes from that year spell it out. Steady dividends over new furnaces, cash out the profits, let the plants rust. When President Kennedy called him to the White House, Blau defended the payout as a sacred obligation to investors. The workers got a wage freeze. The company's capital budget shrank by nearly $400 million in 4 years, while the dividend checks kept clearing. 2 decades later, David Roderick took the helm and found a new way to shield the boardroom. In 1981, as the mills in Monessen and Youngstown bled jobs, Roderick pushed through the Marathon oil buyout for $239 million. The deal loaded U.S. Steel with debt, but Roderick's own compensation soared. The SEC filings from 1983 show a $4.2 million bonus, tied not to production, not to jobs saved, but to the cost cuts and plant closures that gutted the workforce. Roderick's defense, offered in a 1981 press conference, was blunt. We must diversify to survive. The steel towns got pink slips. The board got richer. David Burritt's signature sits on the 2023 merger agreement with Nippon Steel. His compensation package, disclosed in the 2024 proxy statement, topped $30 million and included stock awards, cash bonuses, and a golden parachute triggered by the sale. Burritt's public statements framed the deal as a victory for modernization and American competitiveness. The fine print in the filings tells another story. The last CEO of U.S. Steel cashed out as the company was handed off for less than the price of a tech startup. 3 names, 3 sets of receipts, 1 pattern. Executive incentives paid in full while the steel towns were left to count the cost. Youngstown once held 170,000 people. By 2025, fewer than 60,000 remain. The city's census records track the exodus, a line that falls year after year, each drop tracing another round of layoffs, another family packing up for good. The steel mills that define the skyline now stand hollow, their windows broken, their parking lots sprouting weeds. What the balance sheets called efficiency, the streets called abandonment. Emergency rooms in Mahoning County report a 6% increase in asthma visits since the last mill went dark. The local health department's 2024 report draws a straight line from lost insurance to rising emergency room admissions. Families who once had union health plans now wait for hours in crowded clinics, their children coughing through the night. The city's mental health services log a 4% uptick in admissions, and doctors and social workers point to the spike in depression, addiction, and suicide that follows sudden mass unemployment. These are not just numbers, they are the lived cost of a decision made in a distant boardroom. The city's finances tell the same story. In 2024, Youngstown defaulted on $45 million in municipal bonds, a crisis triggered by the collapse of the tax base. City Council minutes from that spring read like a confession. Parks shuttered, services slashed, police and fire departments cut to the bone. The 1996 City Charter revision, the last desperate attempt to stave off bankruptcy, now reads like a tombstone for the old order. Every ledger, every hospital log, every census table is a receipt for what was taken. The executives who signed the closures collected bonuses. The analysts who cheered the asset sales moved on to the next deal. The politicians who promised to fight for steel towns posed for photos and cashed their campaign checks. Who stands accountable for a city hollowed out and a generation written off as collateral damage? That is not a rhetorical question, it is the only one left. The ink on the sale was barely dry when Chief Executive Officer David Burritt, directors like Andrea Ayers and Wall Street dealmakers locked in their bonuses, while 20,000 steelworkers got memos, not guarantees. Politicians from both parties signed off, hands washed. This isn't foreign competition. It's domestic surrender by name and by contract. The real cost isn't measured in billions, but in futures stolen. Leave your thoughts below. Someone should keep count.